It's been a little while, of course, since I last did a drift build in special projects. It was for the BP Falcon Mazda RX-7, this time for probably an equally recognisable car from Gran Turismo's past, the Harper Silvia. It's been in a bunch of Gran Turismo games, it's got super iconic livery, and I know that many of you on the channel don't tend to come to me for drift builds, so if it's not your thing, that's totally fine. It's kind of like occasionally I'll do some super expensive car in special projects, and we'll probably will again in future. It's more of like a novelty thing on those occasions. If, though, you are a drifter, I would be keen to know, if you give this one a try, whether you enjoy it or not. It's a bit different to the BP Falcon. The tyres I'm using, for example, are a bit different to then, but I seem to recall that that build was before the physics changes as well, which that's bound to have an effect, I would imagine. And of course, we'll get in a second, if you are maybe not as seasoned of a drifter, to what I would recommend in terms of using this to maybe get into drifting. Now, we are, of course, using Gran Turismo 6 as the point of reference, so 483 horsepower in that game and 1130 kilos, so we're only 1 horsepower off. That's pretty close, that's pretty good to me. As far as the actual mods, if we jump to the ultimate stuff first, you want your titanium rods and pistons, then back to the sports section, the stage 1 weight. Of course, the sports hards, if I recall, are already on there, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was the sports hards that it already has, but either way, I have the comfort hards and the sports hards. The reason why I had both, or was using both, is a similar reason to the BP Falcon. For that car, it works really well, having the different on the front and the rear, and I know for many drifters you do like to have different on the front and the back. For this one, I actually found that it works better with just comforts front and rear, so that'll be down to personal preference and drifting style, so give it a try, go with what I've gone with, and then if you feel like you need to change it, of course then you can experiment with other tyres. As far as the club sports section, you want your bored out engine, the high lift cams, the stage 2 weight, of course, the restrictor and the ballast. For the semi-racing stuff, as far as the crank, that is done, the ECU is done. For the turbo, you've got a couple of options. I was initially planning to use the low RPM turbo with the upgraded intercooler. You'll see the intercooler in a second because you actually don't need to buy it if you're doing what I've done, which is instead go for the mid-range. The reason why I went for the low is I thought I'd be changing through the gears quite a lot. As it turns out, you really don't need to, and we'll get more into that in a second. So the mid-range keeps you in that, well, range of horsepower much better with the gearing and the style of drifting that I use with this car. So again, if you're not super into drifting, all of this will probably just go over your head and you won't really care anyway, but if you're going to give it a try, I would recommend going for the mid-range. It definitely seems to work better for the flow through corners. Now, as far as the diff, that of course is the fully customised unit. I've gone for the manual transmission. It saves a few points and it's not really like you need the full-on sequential one. I've gone for the increased body rigidity. For the racing stuff, we've got the anti-lag fitted, but I don't actually have it turned on. Again, that's kind of a preference thing. If you want it turned on, absolutely go for it. We've got the polish ports, the balance tuning, bored out engine. Like I said, I have purchased the intercooler, but I'm not actually using it. So if you want to go for what I've done, don't bother buying that. We've got the air filter, the silencer, the manifold, the pads and the discs. Of course, the brake balance controller, that's more of a preference thing on drifting style. For me, I'm more of a handbrake drifter rather than a foot brake. I know some people like to use the foot brake to like lock up the front end or lock up the back end. Usually lock up the back end. So again, I'll leave that up to you. As far as the suspension though, that is fully customised, likewise with the clutch and the flywheel. Of course, under the extreme section, well, it's one of the few times where having the hydraulic handbrake and steering angle adapter is definitely justified. That's kind of the whole point. I don't usually use it for that, but it is definitely one of those builds. And like I said, the ultimate stuff is the rods and pistons. So in terms of the parts, it's kind of similar to what you'd often do for a circuit build anyway. And in real life, this car was used, if I recall, for some time attack kind of stuff anyway. But we're focusing in more so on the drift side of things. So, as far as the actual bits and bobs that we've done, we've got the comfort hards fitted, like I said, front and back. As far as the suspension, 86mm, 10 on anti-roll, so all the way up, so you've got next to no body roll, 20 and 30 for the dampers, so super low, and then the springs are super stiff, so the springs are doing all of the work. 3.3 on the front and the back. Of course, huge difference in the camber, as you would always expect from a drift car. Again, this might be too low for some people, too high for others. If you're newer to it, as I said before, give it a try and see what you feel. 4 on the front, half on the rear. Then as far as the tow, we've towed all the way out on the front, which sounds like it would be crazy, like completely undrivable, but as it turns out, it's actually not. And then as far as the rear, just a little bit, and the reason why I like having a little bit of tow out on the back, even with a rear-wheel drive car, is it just makes initiating the drifts that much easier. It just naturally flicks the tail out a little bit more. As far as the diff, of course, again, the diff will be a huge difference between different players. I've gone for 10, 30, 20. I like the way that feels, but I already know that there are so many different preferences of what people prefer for drifting. Some people like to have kind of a short back and forth style where you're constantly flicking the car around. Other people prefer super long controlled drifts, like for the tandem kind of stuff. And obviously it depends very much on the track that you're going to use it on as well. So there's so many variables. I think it would be impossible for me to build a car that can suit everyone's style, so it's more of like a middle ground canvas, if you will. And then as far as the transmission, 250 on the auto settings, so nothing too crazy there. Kind of a medium to low-ish ratio overall. As far as the ballast joint, 64 kilos, that takes us to the Gran Turismo 6 weight. We've put that all the way to the front, so of course very front biased, which helps loosen up the back end for drifting. We want to reduce the ECU just a little bit to 93% to get us to roughly GT6 power levels. As far as downforce, the lowest on the back and the highest on the front. Again, personal preference will definitely come into play there, but that works quite well for me. Anti-lag, like I said, is turned off, and you can see all of the other stuff over there. So with all of that spiel out of the way, now of course you want to see it in practice, and also if you are perhaps less experienced with drifting, give you a bit of an insight into how I would recommend using it. What I ended up doing, and of course this will not work for every track, but at the very least here at Tsukuba, is to actually fairly simply put it into third and pretty much just leave it there for most of the lap, because it just naturally seems to love being in third, that medium range power band, and it kind of just does the work for you. It really is a forgiving car as far as drifting goes. Keep the revs fairly high, but not necessarily, as I said, topping out, and it kind of is pretty easy to drift. Sometimes with Gran Turismo the physics are a bit more awkward to work with when it comes to drifting, especially in the kind of middle ground games like GT4 and 5, but for this, yeah, I think even if you're not too experienced, you might find it easier than you would assume. For a wide open track, I don't know how it would necessarily perform there, because obviously you can't just stick it in third and stay there, but at least for a tighter technical circuit where you just drift from corner to corner, like Tsukuba, well, it feels to me at least pretty close to perfect. And as I've said many times, I'm far from being the best of drifters, so if I can do this with the car, well, it certainly bodes well for those of you who also don't drift too often, and for those who are drifting all the time, or maybe do your own builds already, I would be curious, what do you think of the build? Do you find that it suits you? Is there anything you would recommend people change, maybe for a certain type of track, whatever the case may be? And of course, all the rest of the builds are more conventional. I just wanted to have a bit of a change of pace, like with the BP Falcon. So check out the remaining builds for the week. Only 2 left tomorrow, of course the ones which we've already done. And for now, thanks for watching.